Curricular 8 training. I hope we've had time to rest in between the trainings, and excited as we are because we are coming towards the end of curriculum 8 tomorrow, or course 8 tomorrow. We'll be continuing with NADEC principles. So I'm going to share the screen with you. Sure. So we are continuing with the principles, as I've already said, and we are going to start off our discussion today with principle 7, which is supervision and consultation. Supervision is um, a formal engagement or a formal interaction between a supervisee and a supervisor. It's formal in that usually for a supervisor and a supervisee, before they begin this interaction, there has to be some discussion in terms of the roles and the expectations that each have uh, in a supervisory relationship. The purpose of supervision is actually to enhance the supervisee's knowledge and to also build skills for the supervisees. And therefore, for supervisors, the expectation is that they should provide accurate information. Providing accurate information for the supervisees means for the supervisor, you also have to be going through professional development so that you can stay abreast in order for you to provide accurate information for your supervisees. It's timely evaluations. Usually, supervision is scheduled. It's not something that you do without necessarily having information about how you are going to go about it. It is constructive consultation. Normally, when a supervisor meets with the supervisee, the main point is to discuss and provide support in terms of the work that they are engaged in, and to provide constructive consultation so that they build their skills and enhance their knowledge. As a addiction professional, you shall maintain appropriate relationship with your supervisee. This is very important given the fact that usually a supervisor is more senior, and therefore you do not want to have inappropriate relationship with your supervisees. So having clear boundaries in terms of how you relate with your supervisees is very important. The main purposes I've already highlighted is also to develop supervisees' potential and independent functioning. So we are going to look at the standards that are encompassed in this principle of supervision and consultation, which is there are about 33 standards. So similarly, as we did yesterday, we'll go through the standard and we'll discuss and maybe probably share our own experiences in terms of what happens in our different respective areas. So I'm going to stop sharing and then go to the manual a bit. Share. Are we able to see the screen?
Yes, I can see it.
So as I've said, there are about 33 standards within this principle. The first is an overview of what supervision and consultation is. As noted, as a supervisor, you are supposed to provide accurate and current information, and your supervision should be constructive, and you should strive to actually build the supervisee. The first standard is responsibility. Addiction professionals who teach and provide clinical supervision accept the responsibility of enhancing professional development of students, supervisees by providing accurate and current information. So you can see that, like for one to be a supervisor, you need to take and be accepting of the responsibility that comes with it. It's not by the way kind of a role, because you are building and ensuring that your supervisors or your students actually get the correct information to build their skills, and to in order for them to effectively provide treatment for your clients. Number two, addiction professionals shall complete a training specific to clinical supervision. This is very important because I know in my country, most people who say they are clinical supervisors, they have not actually gotten the specific training for clinical supervision. There is a specific training for one to actually say they are a clinical supervisor. So it's important that for addiction professionals, before you take on the role, to actually have prior training for you to be effective. You also need standard 3 to ensure that your interns or students or supervisees are knowledgeable about code of ethics. So as a supervisor, this is part of your training for the people that you will be supervising. Before you have a supervisee relationship, there has to be some sort of an agreement and understanding in terms of what it is that you will be doing with your supervisee. At times, for other programs, they have an informed consent as an integral part of setting up a supervisory relationship. I know sometimes when people work in the same institute or in the same program, there is sometimes we don't have this informed consent, but we do have an understanding in terms of the rules and what is expected from a supervisor and a supervisee. But it works well when there is an informed consent into the supervisory relationship. There should be discussions regarding client privacy and confidentiality, because when you bring in your supervisee, obviously they're going to be coming in with their cases that you're going to be discussing. Terms of supervisory relationship and fees shall be negotiated by the supervisor and supervisee. I know Beatrice gave an example of somebody who was out of Kenya who wanted to have a supervisory relationship. It's always important to actually talk about expectations and the rules, even if even when there are fees that are involved before we start the relationship, and it shall be documented in the supervisory contract. For the fees, like for if you are a supervisor and your supervisors are in that program, there is less likely to be fees that are negotiated because it's part of your role as a supervisor working in a program. But a lot of times it happens when if as a supervisor I'm supervising people outside my program or outside my clinic, that's when maybe we can talk about fees. The standard 5 is informed consent. Supervisors shall provide clients with a written professional disclosure statement. This is important because your clients should be aware of the information of what issues are going to be discussed besides you as a clinician and them. So in terms of the informed consent, when discussing limits of confidentiality with your clients, if you are a supervisor, you have to disclose that at times you will be discussing the case clinical issues with your supervisor. Um, Supervisors shall inform clients about who shall have access to their clinical records and when and how these records will be stored and transmitted and otherwise be reviewed. Continuing with the informed consent, clinical supervisors shall communicate to the supervisee during supervision, informed consent, procedures for handling client and clinical crisis. Alternate procedures are also communicated and documented in the event that the supervisee is unable to establish contact with the supervisor during a client and clinical crisis. So in the informed consent, you also want to ensure that there is alternative alternative supervisors in the event that your supervisor is not available. There should be somebody who is able to take on the role. Then with regards to policies, clinical supervisors shall inform supervisors of policies and procedures to which supervisors shall adhere. These policies could be program policies, and for people giving clinical supervision, that is having supervisees outside, you should be knowledgeable about policies of where that supervisee is actually working, to ensure that you do not go out of or maybe you do not align your supervisory relationship with policies where the supervisee is working. Supervisor shall inform supervisees regarding the mechanisms for due process appeal of supervisor's action. There should be policies in terms of in case a supervisee has concerns about the supervisor, what to do and what actions to take. They should be there, and they should be availed to the supervisee as a supervisor. Multiculturalism. Clinical supervisor shall be cognizant of and address the role of multiculturalism in the supervisory relationship between the supervisor and the supervisee. Educators and site supervisors shall offer didactic learning, content, and experiential opportunities related to multiculturalism and cultural humility throughout their programs. If you are in a role of a clinical supervisor, you would always want to create opportunities for your supervisees to actually learn about different or diverse cultures and provide experiential opportunities. For example, it could be that for your supervisee, you take them on or give them clients that are different from their culture, so that they can actually have that opportunity related with multiculturalism. And then number 10, diversity. Educators and site supervisors shall make attempt to recruit and retain diverse faculty and staff. This also relates with the standard that we discussed yesterday, that in terms of recruitment, you would want to make sure that your staff is diverse. It also gives supervisors an opportunity to actually have that multiculturalism experience in your work environment. Diversity. Educators and site supervisors shall provide appropriate accommodations that meet the needs of diverse student body and support well-being and academic performance. So as a clinical supervisor, obviously, when you are actually recruiting or maybe getting in supervisees, you want to ensure that even the supervisees, there is a diversity amongst them. Boundaries. You have to, as a clinical supervisor, intentionally develop respectful and relevant professional relationships and maintain appropriate boundaries with clinicians, students, interns, and supervisees in all venues. It's very important in terms of ensuring that there is no confusion with regards to how we actually interact with our supervisees if you are a clinical supervisor. And you shall also be honest and accurate in the assessment of students, intern, and supervisees. So at times when people have relationships that are outside the professional relationship of supervisor, it does actually create maybe some sort of platform for dishonesty for some clinical supervisors when the boundaries are not set as encouraged. Supervisors should maintain ethical, professional, and social boundaries. We've already talked about that. Confidentiality is also one of the most important things when we talk about clinical supervisors. They shall not disclose confidential information in teaching or supervision without expressed consent of a client. And when appropriate steps have been taken to protect clients' identity. Just because you are a supervisor and your supervisees come and discuss their caseload, it does not give you the right to actually disclose confidential information about the client that your supervisee is actually seeing. And then we are expected as clinical supervisors to monitor services provided by supervisees. This is important so that you do not find yourself with litigation without really monitoring what your supervisors are doing. So it's important to set a time where you actually discuss cases. If there are any ethical dilemmas, you also discuss those to ensure that you know the services that your supervisors are actually providing, and most importantly, to monitor the client's welfare. Treatment, educators and site providers should or shall assume the primary obligation of assisting students to acquire ethics, knowledge, skills necessary to treat substance use and addictive behavioral disorders. As part of clinical supervision, you could actually have a workshop where you provide different topics, and ethics being one of those. Impairment, supervisees, including interns and students, shall monitor themselves of signs of physical, psychological, or emotional impairment. Supervisees, including interns and students, shall seek supervision and refrain from providing professional services while impaired. You can see that now we are moving towards the role of the supervisee. So when talking about clinical supervision, it's important to understand the role of a supervisor and what is expected of you as a supervisee, right? And then for clients, supervisees and interns shall disclose to their clients their status as students and supervisees, and shall provide an explanation as to how their status affects the limits of confidentiality, very important. And have informed consent obtained in writing, and includes the client's right to refuse to be treated by a person in training. So usually when we have supervisees or students or interns, we usually want to ensure that our clients actually are aware that this is a training facility or a training facility, so that because some clients actually would prefer not to be treated by a person in training. I've had situations where people would say, no, I don't want a student, I don't want an intern, I want somebody who's already completed, because they do have that right in terms of who to provide service for. Disclosures. Supervisees, interns shall seek and document clinical supervision prior to disclosing personal information to a client. We have covered confidentiality and disclosure. Observations. Clinical supervisor shall provide and document regular supervision sessions with the supervisee. Supervision supervisor shall regularly observe the supervisee in a session using live observation. Yesterday we did discuss, or the day before, we did discuss this issue of confidentiality, that when you have audio or you are recording a session, the client has to be in consent of that before you can actually do that. So as a supervisor, you would want to make sure that you also observe, so that you provide constructive feedback to your supervisee. Supervisors shall provide ongoing feedback regarding supervisee's performance with clients and within the agency. It's always encouraged that when you do observation, because I've seen like some supervisors actually being in the same session with the supervisee, sometimes when we do that as clinical supervision, it actually increases anxiety of the supervisee. So you are better off actually doing observation outside, if it's possible to have a one-way or two-way mirror, so that you can actually have your live observation. Gatekeepers. Clinical supervisors are aware of their responsibilities as gatekeepers. Through ongoing evaluation, supervisors shall track supervisees' limitations that impede performance. So through your regular consultation, you will be discussing these observations or the audios or the videotapes that they might have taken themselves or you would have observed, so that you can look at some of the strengths and some of the opportunities for growth for the supervisees. And in areas where there is areas for improvement, you could also recommend extra classes or workshops for your supervisee to improve. Education. Educators and site supervisors shall ensure that the educational and training programs are designed to provide appropriate knowledge and experience related to addictions that meet the requirement for degrees, licensure. And when you are a clinical supervisor, you want to make sure that when you say that you have, or your site provides training for addiction, make sure that you have clients that actually have SUD, so that your supervisee can actually have an opportunity to practice what they've learned for their degrees and licensure and certification. Because at times we know that sites do not necessarily have diverse clients, more especially if it's not SUD specific. So as educators and supervisors, you make sure that your supervisees actually attain what they had intended to attain before coming to your site. You shall provide, as an educator and supervisor, an ethical manner training and education adhering to NAIDEC code of ethics regardless of the platform. Educators and site supervisors shall ensure the program content and instruction are based on the most current knowledge and information available in the profession. So as a supervisor, it means, or you are required also to stay abreast, obviously, with information regarding or current knowledge regarding addiction. You shall also promote the use of modalities and techniques that are evidence-based as a supervisor. When you do evaluation, you should ensure that student performance are evaluated in a fair manner and in a respectful manner. And your evaluation should be based on already set criteria in terms of what it is the students actually are supposed to attain from a site or from a program, so that there is fairness. Dual relationships. Educators and site supervisors shall avoid at all costs dual relationship or non-academic relationship with students, interns, and supervisees. In terms of supervisors, as much as at times when we have a client come into our office and we realize that this is a person that you know, when you feel that you are not in a position to provide supervision to a supervisee, you can actually say that, especially if it's going to impede your effectiveness as a supervisor. As a clinical supervisor, you will not supervise or shall not actively supervise relatives, romantic sexual partners, personal friends, nor develop romantic, sexual, and personal relationship with students or supervisees. Consultation with a third party will be obtained prior to engaging in dual supervisory relationship. I think this issue of dual relationship was also, it's almost similar to what was covered in the counseling relationship. E-supervision, which was talked about yesterday, before you do it, ensure that you are knowledgeable about use of technologies that ensure privacy and protection of information of clients. And if you are to do that, there has to also be an agreement between the supervisor and the supervisee in terms of the mode of supervision that they would be engaging in. Clinical supervisors shall not condone, right, or participate in sexual harassment or exploitation of current and previous supervisees. So that one is clear in terms of harassment. Distance issues unique to the use of distance supervision shall be in the documentation as necessary. This is important. I know it was also covered yesterday regarding e-supervision, that when you are providing supervision and there's distance, there should be clear documentation as to how you are going to do supervision, what are the expectations, how often you will be doing it to ensure that it's effective. When there's termination, policies and procedures should actually guide termination of the supervisory relationship and shall be disclosed in the supervision informed consent. There should always be policies and procedures informing or guiding supervisory relationship and how to terminate with your supervising. Counseling. Clinical supervisor shall not provide counseling services to supervisees. I don't know, I would want to hear how others think or how this actually works out. Supervisor shall assist supervisees by providing referrals. It usually becomes very muggy when you are a clinical supervisor and then providing counseling for your employees or for your supervisees. So there has to be clear boundaries in terms of your working relationship. Are you a clinical supervisor or you are a counselor? for students, so that it does not blur the understanding of what it is that you are trying to attain. The last one is endorsement. Clinical supervisors shall recommend supervisors for completion of an academic or training program, employment certification. This endorsement comes with responsibility. As a clinical supervisor, you want to make sure that you do not endorse somebody for completion when you know that they have not attained the skills that are required for completion, or the knowledge, or they've not displayed the knowledge that is required for a supervisee to complete. So, and it's okay if a supervisee was supposed to complete in May, and you as a clinical supervisor, you feel that they still need more time in terms of skill acquisition or knowledge acquisition, for you to tell, or maybe to even recommend that they stay further in the program, to ensure that you safeguard the clients by not letting somebody who's not qualified to go and practice. We have about 4 minutes left. Looking at all these standards, I wanted us to share our experience for those that are supervisees or supervisors. What your experience is with regards to supervision and consultation. Jessica, you
Yes, Samuel's hand is raised.
okay? Yes, go ahead, Samuel.
Morocco for such a wonderful presentation. Actually, being in practice in substance use actually for quite some time, one thing I've noticed for us in Africa generally is that we lack uh, basic training for supervision. For me, I'm here to identify a particular place, maybe around, where we can actually be able to say we have really qualified persons that can supervise us. Now, I'm speaking this based on an experience. There was a time, although it wasn't necessarily about substance use, where I have had to seek a clinical supervisor for something in South Africa. And then I was surprised the person that I actually consulted had barely limited knowledge like I had imagined. So for us who are in the universities now and are trying to take on this, you know, the training for drug addiction, I am wondering what will be for us in terms of training for clinical supervision. It is very, very important. Maybe I'm just speaking my mind because I have found that there are very limited uh, trained or professional supervisors around where I am, and I think basically in Africa. My humble take.
Yeah. Thank you, Samuel. George is here with us from Colombo. They do have a course on clinical supervision. George, you can also nod. That is specific just for supervision. It's an advanced UTC course. So there is something that can be done about actually providing supervision. And I think it's very important that we understand that there are theories also in terms of clinical supervision. So it's not just coming in and then listening to your supervisee talk and then you give input there and there. So I do agree that for us, we need to have training to provide clinical supervision. Any other comment? Any other comment, experience? I know you said South Africa is just an example, not to say that people in South Africa do not have the skills. It's just that one person probably, so that we don't come out thinking that people in South Africa don't have the skills or the requisite
Uh,
of to be clinical
Certainly,
supervisor.
Morocco. I actually
Okay.
meant from Nigeria here. Actually, I'm not referring South Africa, but I'm just trying in
Oh,
terms of diversity. You actually talk about multiculturalism, actually, which is very, very
mm,
important. I just
yeah.
find that actually, when I actually consulted the person, I realized the person had little understanding of the culture
Mm-hmm.
and the situation and all, and therefore
Mm,
I realized that the person was
mm,
very limited in
mm.
providing clinical supervision that I required, and I had to
Yeah.
look for someone else. But generally, the point is here in Africa, such services are not available. But it's good that you've told us that we can actually go for such training.
Yeah. You are bringing an important point in terms of understanding diversity, and being cognizant of diversity issues of where your supervisee is from, because you can only be effective. It's more similar to working with a client. When you look at the supervisory relationship, you have to understand your client, their values, their cultures, and all that. And so even with a supervisee, you would have to be aware of cultural issues or diversity issues. So thank you for sharing that. So if there are any questions, we can actually put them in the LMS, and then further discuss those with regards to supervision. So I'm going to stop sharing and let my colleague take over. I don't know whether I've been... Okay, George actually wrote that. I didn't see that. There's an advanced UTC. Moses. Hello, Jessica.
Yes. Is Moses not responding?
Moses, are you?
He has the low bandwidth.
Okay.
Okay, he's here.
Yeah. Thank you, Morocco. I'm going to principle 8, which has to do with concerns. Yeah. Okay. Can you see my slide? Hello, can you see my slide?
It's still loading.
Hello.
It's still loading. It should pop up in a few seconds.
Yeah. Oh, sorry about that. Well,
It's all right.
which is still loading? Is it still loading?
Yes, it's still on the starting to share content screen. Yeah, it hasn't shown up yet.
Wow. Right.
Hopefully it'll just be a few more seconds.
Or maybe I should stop sharing and go back again.
That might help. If it doesn't work, then I can pull it up if that would be easier.
Okay.
But we'll see if it works on your end first.
Okay. Okay, I try sharing again, please, and see whether it works this time.
Okay, I'll let you
If
know.
it doesn't, yeah, okay. If it doesn't, then maybe you can help me share from your own end.
Sure.
But it's showing very well in my screen here. I don't know why it's taking so much time.
Okay, it's loading right now. Let's see if we can... Okay, it's showing up now.
Yes.
It looks good.
It's showing now?
Yes, we can see the slides now.
Okay. Sorry for the delay. Okay, we're talking about principle 8, which is resolving ethical concern. What are our objectives? By the end of this module, we'll be able to provide an overview of principle 8, which is resolving ethical concerns. And they use a process of ethical decision making with a case study relevant to principle 8, resolving ethical concerns. and provide an overview of Principle 9, research and publication. Resolving ethical concerns, additional professionals shall adhere to and uphold the code of ethics into daily professional work. Ensure that professional actions are ethical and legal and abide by ethical standards. There are some small group assignments here supposed to be done in group if we are doing face-to-face, but now we are going to go through principles one by one, just like Morocco did, and then we'll discuss them together. And we're supposed to develop a case study. A case study and use general format as previous case studies. Present a situation, ask questions, and if possible, base the case study on an actual ethical dilemma. Assign a recorder to write the case study. But here, if anyone has any case study that readily comes to mind, then we can pick on that. Otherwise, if we have time, then I can maybe give a scenario, maybe from my own experience. And then, well, if it's a face-to-face presentation, you should be able to trade, after presenting your own case study, you can trade them with other case studies. They learn from others' experiences too. I'll go back to the resource page now so that we can go through the principles one by one. Just a moment, please. I can see my slide this time.
Yes, I can see it
my
now.
Slide? Okay.
Yes.
So we have about 14 here. I'm the first 7, then one participant will help me with the other 7. So, Principle 8, resolving ethical concerns. Resolving ethical concerns, the addiction professional shall behave in accordance with legal, ethical, and moral standards for his or her work. To this end, professionals will attempt to resolve ethical dilemmas with direct and open communication among all parties involved and seek supervision and or consultation as appropriate. Let's go to the Code of Ethics 1. 1 is Code of Ethics. Addiction professionals shall adhere to and uphold the NADA Code of Ethics and shall be knowledgeable regarding established policies and procedures for handling concerns related to unethical behavior at both the state and national levels. Providers strive to resolve ethical dilemmas with direct and open communication among all parties involved and seek supervision and or consultation when necessary. Providers incorporate ethical practice into their daily professional work. Providers engage in ongoing professional development regarding ethical and legal issues in counseling. Providers are professionals who act ethically and legally. Providers are aware that client welfare and trust depend on a high level of professional conduct. Additional professionals hold other providers to the same ethical and legal standards and are willing to take appropriate action to ensure that these standards are upheld. So, Code of Ethics will guide everything we do. Guide the provider, will guide the counselor, and our relationship with the client. And if there are dilemmas, the Code of Ethics will guide us in taking decision. We should use the decision making tool to be able to make up, take decisions, whenever there are problems or challenges. Number 2, understanding. Addition professionals shall adhere to and uphold the NADAC Code of Ethics and shall be knowledgeable regarding established policies and procedures for handling concerns related to unethical behavior at both the state and national levels. Providers strive to resolve ethical dilemmas with direct and open communication among all parties involved and seek supervision and or consultation when necessary. Providers incorporate ethical practice into their daily professional work. Providers engage in ongoing professional development regarding ethical and legal issues in counseling. So we have to actually understand what the Code of Ethics is all about and be able to apply it. It's not just to have head knowledge, but we should be able to apply it in all circumstances. And providers are professionals who act ethically and legally. Providers are aware that client welfare and trust depend. I think I'm just repeating this. So let's go to number 3. Decision-making model. Addition professionals shall utilize and document when appropriate an ethical decision-making model when faced with an ethical dilemma. A viable ethical decision-making model shall include, but is not limited to, A, supervision and or consultation regarding the concern, B, consideration of relevant ethical standards, principles, and laws, C, generation of potential courses of action, D, deliberation of risks and benefits of each potential course of action, E, selection of an objective decision based on the circumstances and welfare of all involved, and F, reflection and redirection, if necessary, after implementing the decision. So we should be familiar with the decision-making model and ensure that we apply it whenever we have ethical dilemmas. And then we must also know that this decision-making model includes, but it's not limited to, supervision, consultation regarding the concern, and the relevant and ethical standards, principles, and laws, and generation of potential courses of action, deliberation of risks and benefits of each potential course of action. For those of us who double as administrators, we also work as a clinician and also a counselor when there's need. You find that all these things apply, and whenever you are faced with a dilemma, you have to think about all this and look at what your professional ethics say about the whole thing. You're also looking at it also from the organizational setting, and you look at the laws that apply to your own country, the civil service laws, and so many other things come into play. And sometimes, if you are working in a treatment center like mine, and then there are conflicts between you, maybe a counselor, a psychologist, a social worker, so on and so forth. So you find that you have to tread carefully and look at it. Which decision-making model are you going to use? Are you going to approach it from your own professional angle, or you're looking at it from the psychological angle, or from somebody who is a social worker or a occupational therapist? So, but there must be a common ground. And then you begin to see what applies. And then what the civil service, in my own setting, you look at what the civil service law says, because if you not take any action, they can go to their attorney or lawyer and say they are not happy with this decision, and then it becomes a legal problem. And they will look at all this and what the civil service law says and what the laws of the land says. So it's a balancing act that requires a lot of tact and consultation. But when you consult and look at it and from different angles and apply the decision-making model and involve relevant professionals, colleagues, senior colleagues, or whatever, you find that you never make a mistake. You eventually take the right course of action, looking at the pros and cons of whatever you're trying to do. And this is what we face as professionals who work in a treatment setting, because you have all kinds of people working together, and work, as a team. So we'll frequently, come across these kind of problems from time to time. So it's up to you now to be able to know what you apply, so that you don't run foul of the law and you don't jeopardize even your own profession, or even the rules and regulations of the treatment setting. So it's a little bit very dicey, and you have to be very careful whenever you are making decisions. That means that you are never in a rush, to take any action without due consultation. Jurisdiction: the NADAC and NCC AP Ethics Committees shall have jurisdiction over all complaints filed against any person holding or applying for NADAC membership or NCC AP certification. That's straightforward. And investigations: the NADAC and NCC AP Ethics Committees shall have authority to conduct investigations, issue rulings, and invoke disciplinary action in any instance of alleged misconduct by an additional professional. Yeah, so once you sign up to it, then you have to abide by whatever decision they take. Participation: additional professionals shall be required to cooperate with the implementation of the NADAC Code of Ethics and to participate in and abide by any disciplinary actions and rulings based on the code. Failure to participate or cooperate is a violation of the NADAC Code of Ethics. I suppose this is straightforward. Cooperation: additional professionals shall assist in the process of enforcing the NADAC Code of Ethics. Providers shall cooperate with investigations, proceedings, and requirements of the NADAC and NCC AP Ethics Committees, ethics committees of the other professional associations, and all licensing and certification boards having jurisdiction over those charged with a violation. So you see, you are looking at the ethics committee of the profession, you are looking at NADAC, you are looking at the laws of the land, you are looking at licensing and certification boards. If I have a professional working with me who, runs foul, maybe does anything unethical, and if he say, for instance, a doctor, it's easier for me to deal with a doctor than to deal with maybe a psychologist or a social worker or maybe an occupational therapist who is working as a additional professional, because it's been trained in this aspect. Because for us, we know the laws, and supervision in the medical setting is well structured. In fact, medicine is a regimented profession. And right from your postgraduate training, you know what you're supposed to do, who you're answerable to, and the line of supervision is spelled out very clearly. You know what you're supposed to be doing at any time T. And you know what for instance, for those of us in this country, what the Medical and Data Council says about your own practice and what constitutes malpractice on ethical behavior. And you know what the laws of the land say, and you know what the civil service laws say. So for us, it is very easy. But for other professions which may not be very clearly defined and straightforward and may not be as regimented as ours, you have to actually tread very carefully when you are working as a team. That's where you have to see and make a lot of wide consultation and apply this ethical decision model to see that you take the best course of action. Somebody should read for me. I want a participant to read from 8 down to 14, please. Somebody should volunteer, and Jessica, please help me out. I want somebody who can read it very clearly and fast enough for us so that we can go together. One volunteer, please.
All right. It looks like Fatima would like to speak.
Okay, Fatima, please go ahead. From 8.
You said from 8 to 14?
14, 8 to the end, wherever it ends.
Okay. 8. Addiction professionals shall seek and document supervision and or consultation in the event that ethical responsibility conflicts with agency policies and procedures, state and or federal laws, regulations, and or other governing legal authority. Supervision and or consultation shall be sued to determine the next best steps. 9. Crossroads. Addiction professionals may find themselves at crossroads when the demands of an organization where the provider is affiliated poses a conflict with the NADAC Code of Ethics. Providers shall determine the nature of the conflict and shall discuss the conflict with other supervisor or other relevant person in the organization in question. Expressing their commitment to the NADAC Code of Ethics, providers shall attempt to walk through the appropriate channels to address the concern. 10. Violation without harm. When there is evidence to suggest that another provider is violating or has violated an ethical standard and harm has not occurred, addiction professionals shall attempt to first resolve the issue informally with the other provider, if feasible, provided such action does not violate confidentiality rights that may be involved. 11. Violations with harm. Addiction professionals shall report unethical conduct or unprofessional modes of practice leading to harm, which they become aware of to the appropriate certifying or licensing authority, state or federal regulatory bodies, and or NADAC and or NADAC. Providers shall seek supervision through consultation prior to the report. Providers shall document supervision and consultation and reports if made. 12. Non-respondents. Members of NADAC or NCCAP Ethics Committee, hearing panels, board of directors, membership committees, officers, or staff shall not be named as a respondent under these policies and procedures as a result of any decision, action, or exercise of discretion arising directly from their conduct or involvement in carrying out adjudication responsibilities. 13. Consultation. Addiction professionals shall seek consultation and direction from supervisors, consultants, or the NADAC Ethics Committee when certain about whether a particular situation or course of action may be in violation of the NADAC Code of Ethics. Providers consult with persons who are knowledgeable about ethics, the NADAC Code of Ethics, and legal requirements specific situation. 14. Retaliation. Addiction professionals shall not initiate, participate in, or encourage the filing of an ethic or grievance complaint as a means of retaliation against another person. Providers shall not intentionally disregard or ignore the facts of the situation.
Thank you very much, Fatima. Very grateful. Thank you. So, you can see these principles one by one, and there are many of them. So, whenever you have an ethical dilemma, it's not just to rush into making conclusion, because in our own part of the world, sometimes some administrators can be very, very overbearing, and they can be very, very authoritative, and they will not want, to take this and go through this process of maybe ethical decision making, and they want to come down very hard, on erring staff. But you see, for those of us who are in this profession, we have signed, to the NADAC Code of Ethics. We have our own professional ethics. We have our licensing body that guides us. We have the civil service rules here in Nigeria. We have what the laws of the land say. So you are bound to look into all this, because if you don't, you will run into problems, and it may become a protracted legal battle, and it will rubbish and tarnish the image of the organization, or even you might be liable, and that would be very, very catastrophic for you if you make that kind of mistake. And I don't know whether any participant has any question before I give you a scenario, about our own experience where we worked when we started, this treatment center, what we went through with one of our staff. But I want to entertain any maybe question or contribution from participants before I give you a case scenario, and then we can discuss it.
I have a question, sir.
Please go ahead.
Yes, number one, I want to know if the NADAC and NCCAP code of ethics is applicable to us here in Nigeria. That's number one. Number two, I'm looking at this all ethics and ethics. We said that counseling or people in substance use job, we should have empathy. We should empathize. And even if there is a problem, I think that empathy and non-judgmental situation too should come to play. I remember sometimes about 3-4 years ago, there was an issue here in Zaria concerning a doctor, really, who had a problem at the ABU teaching hospital down there, I know, with the patient or something. And then when the doctor explained himself, you will really empathize with him, you know, concerning what happened. But the board that was sitting, you know, concerning the whole issue, they were not really empathizing with him. I remember now, profession is regimented, you know, and then you have people whom you report to and all that. So that made me to remember that issue. Why is it that when things happen, immediately the people who are sitting at the board are immediately judgmental, they are already prejudiced, they already made up their mind about the whole situation. And when the people concerned explain their situation, instead of them to look at it from both sides, you know, they just go directly and pass a judgment on the person, and the person suffers. So these are my two observations, sir.
Well, first of all, you know, we're talking about addiction professionals. Yes, the National Code of Ethics apply to those of us who are in Nigeria because, you know, we have our ISOP branch, and most of the ethical code, you know, are derivable from the National Code of Ethics. And when you are going to sit for your ACAP exam, you cite this Code of Ethics, they are going to abide by them. So, and it's not only limited to the US, but it applies to many other countries, and it's in fact more or less, you know, a global thing now, universal. So it applies to us in Nigeria. And particularly the doctor you're talking about, the doctor is not an addiction professional, I guess. There are, I told you, medicine is very regimented. We have our own ethical code of ethics, you know, ethical code that guides our own conduct. And I tell you that from the most junior doctor to the highest level, the supervisory process is very much spelled out. You have a logbook, you have this and that, you have your responsibilities clearly spelled out what you're supposed to be doing and what you're not supposed to be doing, and you have to sign this, you have to sign that. So there's no confusion at all when it comes to medicine. And then we have apart from that, we have our medical data council that regulates activities. But the hospital will look at the issue based on the civil service laws. We look at what the medical data council says about professional behavior or misconduct, and then they will look at what they will set up also a board, and the doctor is supposed to have another colleague who represents you in the medical board, so that whatever decision they take is okay. But if he disagrees, he can petition. He can get the attorney to to petition, and then from there he's likely to go to the medical and data council, and it's a tribunal. Whatever they settle is final for the doctor. So it's more or less like a Supreme Court. So that's what happens when if it involves a doctor. So our own lines are clearly spelled out. But I say when it involves other professionals that are not medical doctors, that's where we tend to have problems. But for us, it's clearly spelled out. So thank you for that question. And is the gravity of the offense, Fatima? What you think? You may take it lightly, but for the medical profession, that may be a very serious. So let me just give you a scenario. When we started our treatment, this thing, then you can have maybe you look at it. We had one of our staff who did the mandatory 1-year service as a graduate with us. He was posted to our facility, and then he served for 1 year, and we trained him. And he was interested in becoming an addiction professional. We trained him using the UTC module, and so on and so forth. So when he got the job and started working with us, then we started seeing some behaviors that we are not happy about. First of all, he was always, running down other professional colleagues in the team, and he was the least qualified the least experience, in fact, with the least credentials, was always fond of running down other professionals, particularly the ladies, because he was, he's a male, so he was always running down the female colleagues who were even better qualified and experienced than he is. And then he started showing some unethical behavior. He was always, going, to cancel clients who come from wealthy parents, and he would do some side counseling for clients that were not his. And then the third thing again was that he started scheduling some family sessions, even when he was not qualified, to call for family session, and he would do that on Saturdays when he knows that most workers will not be around, except maybe myself and my deputy, who will go around to see what was happening. And he will stumble on him saying he's having family session. On what grounds are you conducting family session? Who did you notify? We say family session should be done as a team, because we work as a team. And if you are going to summon any family for family session, we prepare and get the team ready. So we gave a verbal warning. He didn't bother. He repeated the same thing again on 2 occasions or 3 occasions. We gave him verbal warning. Then, in fact, the worst thing that he did was that he now wrote a medical report for a client. Sorry, just a minute. He wrote a medical report for a client to his own employers without my knowledge. And no medical report should emanate from the facility without my signature. So he forged, a medical report for a client and wrote to his own employers. And then the employer read the report and said, no, this result couldn't have emanated from this place. And then they now brought the report back and said, did this report actually emanate from you? I look at it and say, this is not my language. This is certainly not my signature. And then we set up, we gave a query and set up a different committee. And then we came up with this judgment that he wasn't fit to continue with the work there because he was considered a nuisance, and then he was doing unethical practices, exploiting our parents, for pecuniary benefits. And we said his services were no longer needed and we let him off. But he was rude in his response. He started threatening me, and in fact, we ended up in the police station. We will have to take it to the police station, and it was there that we settled out everything. When the police had our case, because I said if care is not taken, I was going to proceed further. So when they had our case, the police, I remember the IPO said, he asked, he said, are you actually mentally sound? He asked him. He said, yes, he was mentally. He said, no, I don't think you're mentally sound. He said, you don't have a case. If this case goes further, you'll be liable. Please just leave these premises and leave this work and go and look for another job. So that's how the issue was resolved. This is what we experienced when we were starting. Then we didn't apply any ethical decision-making model. We just based it on our own civil service laws. We look at what the laws of the land say, and then I also approach it also from my own professional point of view. So this is food for thought. Maybe I want to hear 1 or 2 comments from you before beat it over quickly, please. Because they say we should create.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
I have a question.
Yeah, please go ahead. Just a minute.
In terms of all these ethical values and the rest, and the aspect of consent by the clients, where do we really have a kind of official gazette or record for research purpose where we can get some of these documents to back up our research work? Do we really have any, like this NADAC now, do we have any, maybe let's say Nigeria case studies or other case studies from other African countries, apart from most of the researches from countries of the West?
Well, I don't know. Okay, I don't know where you're from. Let me answer before you yourself quickly. We have an ICOP Nigeria branch now. We have our own code of ethics. I've worked with the medical professional. You can't conduct any research without going through the and with the ethical board, they look at all the research and the informed consent is part of it. Everything must meet ethical standards before you are granted permission or approval to carry out the research. So if it's not, then they tell you that their approval is not given. You must abide by ethical standards and get ethical approval before you carry it. I know that several places in Nigeria, or even institutions, don't really have ethical board. It's just now that they are actually coming out with medical board. But in medicine, the ethical boards have been established long time ago, and you must abide by them. Even for your postgraduate dissertations and thesis, you must take your proposal to the ethical board, get ethical approval. So these things are clearly written. But I know for some other professions, they're not clearly written. We can discuss that further in the LMS. Please, Beatrice, take over. I'm sorry for taking too much, encroaching into your time.
No problem, Moses. That was a very important discussion. I have even contributed to it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
I have said that even as you were terminating that worker, I do think you did use some ethical decision making, maybe informally rather than formally.
Yeah, that's very right.
Because it sounded like your decision was quite ethical. So I do think you did use ethical decision making model, though informally rather than formally. Thank you very much, Moses and Morekwe, for that foundation and taking us through principle number 7 and 8. And now we come to the very last principle, which is principle number 9, which is about research and publication. So basically, NAIDAC does encourage us to do research and to also do publications as a way of contributing to the evidence-based and outcome-driven practices that guide the profession. If we do not research, if we do not disseminate that knowledge, we are not contributing to the development of the field. So research and publication is encouraged, and I'm happy I'm speaking to professors in the university for whom research and publication is a core business. So this particular principle is very applicable to us as a team. And so this principle talks about what we should do when we want to participate in research, when we want our students to participate in research, when we want our clients to participate in research, and our responsibilities in terms of safeguarding and protecting the rights of the research participants. So just like the rest, we have got the assignments, which I'm going to stop sharing now so that we can go to the principle itself and look at its. This is a very, very close to our hearts as professors in universities. I'm sure we are going to identify a lot with what it is going to be talking about. So like we have said, this principle does encourage us to submit material for publication, whether it is handouts, whether it is materials for clients, for students, or the general public. But it reminds us to adhere to what is copyright laws, and I think that is going to be discussed quite a bit in the different standards. So the first standard is focusing specifically on research, and it does say that research and publication are actually encouraged as a way to contribute to the knowledge base and skills. And I find this very important for us, especially as we go towards implementing this evidence-based curriculum in our institutions. I think one of the things we want to begin to think about is how we are going to begin to evaluate these programs that we are going to establish through research and also disseminate our findings and our experiences from our different contexts. So this point, standard number 1, is really encouraging us to contribute to the knowledge base. Now, the second standard is about participation. So this standard is emphasizing that as addiction professionals, we have a responsibility to support the efforts of researchers by participating whenever. I did tell you we are implementing the postgraduate diploma and our students are doing their project. We have actually requested the treatment centers where they are working to allow them to do some research, within those institutions. And this is really in the spirit of this standard, that as professionals in addiction field, we have a responsibility to support research efforts. I have found that practitioners in the field of SUD are so busy working with clients, they may not have the ability to conduct research or to even document the efficacy of what it is that they do. And therefore, I have found that we can make very good partnerships between universities and these treatment providers as a way of supporting them so that we work on research projects together. They have got the client, they're implementing the models, we have got the research capacity, we have got the students that can carry out the research, so we can actually work very closely with these professionals towards generating research and knowledge and disseminating the same. Of course, there are many, many regulations that we have to think about. Now, standard number 3 is talking about consistency. Whenever we design or conduct or plan or report research, it must be in a manner that is consistent with relevant ethics and the laws of the state or the laws of the land. It must also be in a tandem with the requirements of internal review boards. Sometimes in different countries, we have got different review boards. For example, in our country, before you do research, you must get clearance from the national, I know we call it NACOSTI, so I'm trying to remember what it stands for, but it's the national authority that deals with research, technology, and innovation. So you must get clearance. If you're also using human subjects, you must get clearance from any of the very many research ethical approval committees. And so this is what we are saying, that whatever study we do, whatever research we do, whether it is the way we plan it, design, conduct, or report, we must remember, we must be guided by ethical principles as well as the laws of the land, as well as any other scientific standards that are guiding research, as well as institutional regulations. Apparently, even before we go to the national body to get the clearance, we also have to get institutional clearance, both for ourselves and our students. Now, the next important point is confidentiality. I think this we understand very well, that as researchers, we must be responsible for understanding and adhering to all the state and institutional policies and guidelines touching on confidentiality. So it is important that whatever information we obtain from participants during the course of research is treated with confidentiality in line with the different policies and principles and laws. Now, number 5 is about independent research. So when we conduct research independently without any governance by an institutional review board, as sometimes will happen in some situations, maybe because the nature of activities we are doing, for logistical and practical purposes, we may not have the benefit of being able to go through the various review boards. Should we do such kind of research, which we are calling independent research, we are still bound by the same ethical principles and the same laws, and therefore we must make efforts to review our plans, our designs, our conduct, and our reporting to ensure that we have followed the highest standards of ethics as well as obliged to any legal requirements. Now, number 7 is about protection. I think for us as researchers, we do understand the importance of protecting the rights of our research participants, whether it is in the way we design, the way we plan, design, or even implement. So we must keep in mind the need to protect the rights of our research participants. Number 7 is about welfare. Sometimes you will need to think about participants' welfare when you carry out your research, and you're being challenged that we need to exercise reasonable precaution throughout the study to avoid causing any harm. That harm can be physical, intellectual, emotional, and social harm. Sometimes when our students are writing their research proposals, as supervisors, we ask them these questions. For example, and I see this a lot, especially with people coming from other departments but doing social science topics. How do you take care of the psychological impact of your research on your participants? A good number of them who don't come from social science or health science do forget to take care of psychological impact of the research on the participants, which is part of negligence of welfare. So this principle is reminding us that when we do a research, let's think about its impact on the psychological, physical, emotional, social well-being of the participants and address that, whether we're going to address it through debriefing or whatever else, or whatever other methods we will be using. Number 8 is about informed consent. I think this one we do understand very well, the need to obtain informed consent. And many of the review boards do actually look at how your client's informed consent process is taken care of in your research design. So this is emphasized in standard number 8. Now, standard number 9 is challenging us to commit to the highest standards of scholarship. You know, many times, and I think all of us in the field of academia have encountered once in a while, situations where scholars will fabricate results or even exaggerate, the impact of the finding for their own good. And we are being challenged here that we need to commit to the highest standards of scholarship and only present accurate information if you have any conflicts of interest, for example, if you're funded, and I see this sometimes in our countries, you're funded by an organization, for example, a producer of alcohol or one of those big alcohol breweries in your country. Now, there is the direction they want your findings to go. So if you do not disclose your conflict of interest, then this is not fair to the consumers of your findings. So we are being challenged to commit to the highest standards of accuracy, disclose any potential conflicts of interest, and of course, we make every effort not to distort or misuse clinical or research findings. And I'm sure you remember from your classes on research that there are many research findings that have been misused and distorted for people's interests, particularly political interests. Now, number 10 is a very important point for us because we work with students. We are being challenged. Sometimes students are always willing to participate in research as participants. And sometimes because you have power of your students, they can actually feel vulnerable, but they will agree to be your participants because after all, they are afraid of what you might do with your grades. So we are being challenged that even when we work with students, we need to disclose to them, those who want to participate in the research, what it's all about, and also assure them that their participation or failure to participate will not affect their academic standing or any supervisory relationship. This is important. I know that students are always feeling like the professors are there and the students are down here. So whatever professor says, just like client-counselor relationship, there is the risk of vulnerability. So we must protect our students. Now, 11 is again related to the same idea, but this time it's talking about using clients as participants. Again, remember, clients are vulnerable. Remember, client work and client material is highly confidential. So when we work with clients as our participants, we must provide informed consent process that allows the clients to feel that they are freely participating, they are not intimidated, they are not going to be denied services because of not participating in research, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, we must ensure we take precautions to protect these clients from any adverse consequences if they choose to withdraw or to decline, not of course forgetting the issues of confidentiality. Now, number 12 is reminding us about consent. That when we are doing research, we have got a responsibility to ensure that we explain or we provide explanations regarding the research and obtain the relevant consent. If the person we are working with cannot be able to consent, then we know that we have got to get consent from a guardian or a person who's legally authorized to do so on their behalf. So that is important for us to keep in mind, the importance of informed consent. Now, explanation is point number 13. We are reminded that once we have collected data and we have our data, rather than just walk away and go, we need to provide participants with a full explanation regarding the nature of the research so that we get rid of misconceptions. Sometimes participants think that after this study, you're going to bring them goodies around the problem you are talking about. Some of them keep waiting for your goodies to come and they never come back. So we're being told we have a responsibility to provide that explanation, and we need to engage in reasonable actions to avoid causing any harm. And of course, the issue of human values is emphasized, amongst other things. Then number 14, which is very important, is talking about outcomes of research. So when we have finished or we have completed our data collection and analysis, we are required to inform our sponsors, to inform our institutions, and anybody else regarding the research procedures and outcomes. Many times, unless if it is compulsory, we often forget to do that. So we are being reminded it is an obligation, an ethical obligation, to actually inform those who are concerned about our research. And the other important information is the need to always acknowledge people that have supported your work in research. Again, I know that many times we forget that when we are done, particularly our students. So the need to remind them of this ethical standard is important. Now, number 15 is about the transfer plan. We are being challenged that as researchers, we must create a written, accessible plan for the transfer of research data to an identified colleague in the event of being incapacitated, being retired, or death. Now, I know this is a hard thing because sometimes I say in Africa, we are not fond of talking about death. We like to believe in the best. And so this number 15 standard is telling us that we need to create a written plan to indicate, supposing you are doing a research and you became incapacitated, or you are in an organization and you retire because your time for serving is over, or in the event of death, who is it that can take up that process and be answerable for that research project? Number 16 is about diversity. And I have been hearing about a lot about diversity in all these principles. So this one is basically talking about how we should report our findings with accuracy and without distortion, and being considerate of the diverse populations that will look at our findings. That is what diversity is about here. Now 17 is about verification. Remember that when we publish our results, they are for public consumption. Other people may want to verify whether the data we have published is accurate, is authentic. So we should not withhold data for other people to be able to scrutinize what it is that we have come up with. If they even want to reanalyze our data, then we should be able to provide them with access. That's what this is about. Now, principle standard number 18 is about data availability. So researchers who supply data aid in research by another researcher, report research results, or make original data available, shall intentionally disguise the identity of participants in the absence of written authorization from the participants allowing release. In other words, if you're going to make your data available to other people, like we have said in number 17, you have a responsibility to ensure that you disguise the identity of participants so that people may not know the source of that data. When I think about this standard, something comes to my mind. I don't know whether this happens in your countries, but many times in our countries and our institutions, we insist for purposes of authentication on students giving us the names of the institutions that they collected their data. One of the disadvantages I have found is that even if you don't name the participants, but you name the institution, and I'll give you an example of a research that was done from one university, and it was on HIV prevalence rates. And this person reported, and you see, they reported and said that they found prevalence rates of X, Y. But because they labeled the university, even though they didn't label the participants, or they didn't identify the participants, from there on, people would have a stigma towards that institution, that, oh, that is the institution where students are full of HIV/AIDS. So sometimes, even if we think that by not identifying participants, but we identify institutional names, we have protected participants, I do think we need to think carefully about that. Now, 19 is about errors. Sometimes you may make a publication and discover that there were errors in your publication. This standard reminds us that we have a responsibility to take reasonable steps to try and make correction on these errors, especially if they are significant. 20 is talking about publication, and it is emphasizing us on what we know very well in our field, but what we have found flouted by some of our colleagues. The issue of plagiarism, the issue of not acknowledging sources. So this point, number 20, is emphasizing that when we author books, articles, or any other material, we must not plagiarize. We must not fail to cite the persons for whom credit for original ideas is due. And we must acknowledge and give recognition, whether it's in presentations, in publications, etc. And whether it's by self or by other people. So I think this is very important for us. I know sometimes some of us have been victims of ideas being taken up by people, published, and people do not acknowledge us and our contributions. Other times, it has been people we know that have done that for other people. So this is against standard 20. Standard 21 is about theft. In fact, it is a very harsh standard which says that if you use copyrighted materials without permission from the author, or do not pay royalties to the author, then that is actually regarded as theft. That is how serious that standard is. Standard 22 is about e-publishing. And it basically is telling us to recognize that even when we enter material on the internet and social media sites or professional media sites, it should be considered a form of publishing. So sometimes we put material in the website. Sometimes you do a YouTube video and circulate it. Then someone else picks it and uses it and does not acknowledge you. We're being told that that kind of situation is a form of publishing, because publishing really is about publication. Publication is about putting it to the public. So the moment we use social media sites, we have actually published information. 23 is about advertising. And this is reminding us that when we do circulate material, we need to take reasonable precaution to ensure that the organization promotes and advertises the materials that are accurate and factual. Now, again, this can affect us. Sometimes as people in the world of academia and in universities, people come to us to actually put out material. If we are not careful, we could, especially the media, if we are not careful, we could actually give material that is not authentic because of the situation we find ourselves in. I have seen colleagues go to speak on, media or send out little pamphlets of information, but that lacks accuracy and facts. And the reason is, that media has a way of pushing you to give things that are populist-like. So we are being challenged that whatever it is that we put out, whether it's books or other materials, we must remember to think about accuracy and facts. 24 is about credit. And we are being reminded that we need to assign publication credit to anybody who has contributed to a publication that we are making in proportion to their contributions and in accordance with customary professional publication practices. I tell you, I have seen people, and sometimes we have a name for them. They ride on the works of others. I have even seen people who, in certain institutions, you supervise a student, it is time to publish the work, and that someone comes and talks to that student and tells them, oh, I can connect you to some journal. And so this student innocently gets connected to a journal, puts that person as an author, but when you think about what that person did, it was absolutely nothing. It's probably being a broker. And that person appends their name on that work. They have no idea about how that project was done. That's what we are being told is unethical in point number 24. So we credit those who participate. I have also seen a scenario where a professor supervises a student through a thesis, and a professor goes on and publishes a paper from that thesis without appending the name of the student. I have actually come across such situations. So this is what we are being challenged about. And that's related to number 25, student material. And remember I said earlier, students are vulnerable. So when you take a student's work and actually publish it and not even put the student's name or put yourself as the lead author, then we are being challenged in standard number 25, that is not acceptable. That we need to get permission from the student, we need to list the student as the lead author, and then of course the rest of us follow. Number 26 is about submissions. Now this one is reminding us of, again, something we do. You submit a manual or a manuscript for consideration in one journal, and you submit it in another one and another one. The danger then is supposing they all publish. So this is reminding us that when we submit articles or manuscripts, we do so one journal at a time. And we are also told if we want to publish some article from some work that was already published, our own work, we need to ensure that we actually get some sort of permission from the original publisher before we can publish a similar work or another work in a different work. And finally, number 27 is about proprietary. And we are being told that if you get an opportunity, for example, to be made a reviewer of a submitted article for publication, or even sometimes you're given a proposal to review before someone is awarded a funding or anything like that, we're being reminded that we shall respect the confidentiality and proprietary rights of those who submitted it. I have seen, again, this being abused significantly, where people submit proposals for grant funding consideration, And those who are reviewers end up taking up those ideas and going to, work with them elsewhere. I have seen people who have been appointed to review material for publication, actually using that for their own good. So all these things is what this standard is telling us. And it's also telling us that if you serve as a reviewer, you must make every effort to only review materials within your scope of competency. Now that's important. So even if you're approached, and I know I have been approached sometimes to review material in certain areas, and I have actually, said no, because someone thinks I am competent, but I feel that there's someone else who's more competent. So instead, I refer another person to be given the work. The other important point, which is the last one, is reviewing materials without professional or personal bias. Sometimes you're given material to review. Maybe that material is written by someone that you have an interest in, and you think you may not be able to be objective. You're going to be influenced by the subjective or personal bias. You're being challenged to own up to that and possibly, request that work be reviewed by someone else. So this is what is covered in principle number 27. And that is the final standard, standard 27. Thank you very much. So we are just at 1 minute after 9. I don't know whether anybody has a comment that they want to make in 1 minute before we wind it up, and probably we'll discuss more in the learning management system. So anyone comment?
Yes.
Yes, Fatima?
When we started this course 8, talking about ethics,
yes,
it started nudging in my mind, because I was thinking that after this training tomorrow or next, I was going to teach some of my colleagues this ethics, because there are a lot of things that are here that we are not doing, and they are very relevant to our profession as substance use professional. But talking about these ethical codes, especially talking about research and publication, I became afraid. I said, people about this, it doesn't mean that I am plagiarizing or I am stealing someone else's job, work, or something, so that Colombo Plan will not come and arrest me.
Thank you very much, Fatima. And I'm sure that I should tell George to respond to that. But before he does, I do know, if you read the beginning of your manual, the initial pages, I, an elder who has the copyright of this material, does allow you to use it for dissemination, as long as you're not using it for profit making. So you can read that and see that. I don't know whether, George, you want to say anything in addition to that? George? Is George here? Maybe he will post a comment for us in the LMS. So tomorrow we are going to go to module 7, which is basically looking at cases. So we will try to apply this knowledge we have studied over the last 6 modules to practical cases. So we shall pick the cases you gave us. We shall also pick some of the cases that were in the some of the principles we were looking at had some cases. So we shall look at the cases you posted. We shall look at some of those cases, and we shall try to now apply these principles as well as the ethical decision-making model to those cases. So now I request Moreko and Moses if they have anything to say before Jessica takes it up.
Nothing really. Thank you, participants, for being.
Thank you. Thank you, Moses. Yes, I can see George has commented that I have very clearly the materials are there for all of us. Thank you, George. So Moreko?
No, there's nothing. I was just going to comment that George is here already commenting on availability of the materials. So thank you, everybody, for participating, for your input, and good night.
Thank you. So we hand it over to Jessica. Jessica?
All right. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. I believe that we are wrapping up UTC 8 tomorrow, and then we have a final UTC walkthrough wrap up on Tuesday, I believe. Other than that, I don't really have any other announcements. So I wish you all a very good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.